from Paella Puppets, and I'm going to show you how to make detachable arm rods for your puppets. I posted some pictures on Facebook and some people requested a video to show exactly how it works, so here we go. I'm going to change the angle so you can see how I make them. I've marked the pattern of the arms onto my fleece with right sides together, obviously, and I'm going to cut this out in a minute, but I just wanted to show you that on one of the arms, for these particular puppets, these are going to be for children. 2 rods is quite difficult for children, so I'm just doing 1 rod on these puppets, and I've marked here and here, which is where we're going to put the rod, and I need not to sew. I want to leave a little gap in the stitching there. So I've done these on the machine, but I've left a little gap there, and now I'm going to cut them out and stuff them, and then I'll show you how to attach the detachable mechanism. Okay, so here's my stuffed hand, and there's the gap here that you can see. Now you've got 2 options here that we might go with. This is a bolt, just a standard one with a thread. You can pop that in there and then sew it up. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Or you can use a wing nut and it goes in the other way around. You have to leave a slightly larger hole and it's a bit more fiddly, but then you don't end up with anything sticking out. So it's up to you really, but I'm going to go with a bolt on this one because that's what I've done with the others. These fibreglass electrician's rods that we're using, an electrician did say to me that sometimes you get splinters off them, so it's important to cover them. But the beauty of these is they have a thread either end. So they have a positive end and a negative end. The positive end works with the wing nut. That's not a very good one. Okay, so these are 5M. We prefer to use the bolts. You get a firmer screw in. You can see that works better. So they're 5M wing nuts or bolts. So I'm going to stitch this into here and let me show you how I do it. So I'm going to be using an upholstery thread, which I always recommend when you're sewing puppets because you can pull it really tight. It's not going to snap. Okay. Put a knot in the end. Okay, so the bolt goes in the hole and then you're going to start to close the hole around the bolt. But if you just close the hole and don't connect the thread with the bolt, it can push inside. So when I get near to the bolt, I'm going to wrap my thread around the bolt, and because it's got a thread, little indentations in the bolt, the thread will catch in those and it will hold the bolt secure. Oops. So come round to the other side, close the hole, come back close to the bolt, round again, and pull the thread nice and tight as you go. Okay, so that shouldn't woggle about too much. It should be fairly secure, but I'm going to add quite a few more little stitches to make sure that it's not going anywhere. I'm going round and round above the widest point of the bolt end, so it can't pull out. But I'm also trying to catch some of those threads that I've wrapped round in order to make sure that it stays where it's put and doesn't disappear inside the puppet arm. I can do one more wrap round and then secure off. So that's the bolt in the arm, nice and neat. You can attach your rod to it quite nicely, and it does stay nice and secure, obviously, when the arm's attached to the puppet. And you can see where I've left a gap in the stuffing, it gives you a nice little arm bend. Okay, now you can also put a gap in the stuffing here so that you get a hand movement as well, which is quite nice. Now, let me just talk about this rod a little bit, because an electrician put a note on the Facebook post that I put on to say that you can get little fiberglass splinters off these. I thought, oh, that's a shame. And then I had an idea. So you can cover these with heat shrink tubing, but it's quite expensive and not very easy to get hold of. In a long run, it tends to come in little bits, which electricians use to cover joints and things. And then of course you need a heat gun, which is also very expensive. Well, 30, 40. So I came up with this idea of covering with bias binding, because I just so happen to have some black narrow bias binding in my stock of stuff on a nice roll, so I had loads of it. So what I did was I covered the rods with this. Where have I just put the scissors? Let me show you how I did it. And then afterwards, I'm going to coat these with PVA glue. So this is quite a cheap way to cover them. It's a little bit fiddly and time consuming, but it will mean that there's no chance of getting any splinters off that fiberglass. And so I'm going to cut myself a strip. And it's much cheaper than the heat shrink glue. So at the end that screws into the arm, I've covered up about halfway up the wide bit at the end. I might cover all the way eventually. I'm just playing with this idea at the moment to see how it works. Or of course I could use a little bit of shrink just to cover that end and really secure the whole length. But so I've opened it up wide at the end, and I'm going to fold over, and then I'm wrapping it round here, and I've got some black thread. I haven't got any upholstery thread in black, otherwise I would be using upholstery thread. But as I'm going to cover this with PVA glue anyway, it's going to really hold it all together really nicely. So I'm overlapping and trying to get that to stay a little bit flat at the top so that it's as inconspicuous as possible, this rod. You really don't want, when you're performing, you don't want people looking at the rod. You want people looking at the puppet and the puppet's hand. So black is a good colour to go. Or the other alternative actually is to use green in the same green as the green screen green, and then when your puppet arm is out to the side it will disappear altogether. Of course, if it's in front of your puppet though, then you have a little bit of nothingness in front of your puppet, which you might not like. It depends how you're going to use your puppet in the video, I guess. So now I've allowed the bias binding to close up again. Bias binding is sort of folded over both edges, and that's quite helpful here because it gives us a nice neat folded edge to sew that won't fray. So I'm just stitching all the way along, which is what I did with the others. So you can see how that goes, can't you? I don't need to do the whole thing. So I stitched all the way along to the end, and what I'm going to do with these now is cover them with PVA glue. It'll give them a bit of a gloss, but I don't think that will matter. I'll see what they're like when they're done, and if it's too irritating, I'll put some matte varnish on, but I think it'll be fine. So there we go. That's our detachable arm rods. I hope you find that helpful. I'm just going to screw that back on again and take it up again.